Most of them turn out to be good kids.
Yeah,
I give you permission that when the class is over to come take your finger and flick that door shut. That'll turn it
I
off.
saw
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's official when you do that.
Yeah, I wouldn't want you to think he's messing anything up, but that's the way you turn this one off. Just hit it, and it'll just close automatically.
I can do that.
I appreciate it, and it'll save film.
Yeah, that one's got a combination. If you open it all the way up, it don't work. And if you
Yeah.
close it all the way, it don't work. But if you get it just right. All righty then. Yeah, I saw Randy again this week. He's got another catastrophe. He's got 2 electric razors, and he's lost all of his charging cords. I didn't even see a phone charging cord. It might have been in his little thing he carried around his neck. But he's got 2 nice Norelco electric razors and no way to charge them up. So that was the problem of the week. And, you know, he just knows somebody stole them. That's the way, every time I go to a place like that, somebody always stole something.
Maybe they got left in the other room that he was in.
There are 100 different things that could happen. He probably left it laying out on the floor, and somebody picked it up. I looked through all the drawers, I thought, but he's got junk. Because every time he goes plays in games, it's kind of like my daddy-in-law. He would win, you know, hand lotion and shampoo and Q-tips and all. He's got boxes of it in the closet. Just stick it up there, you know. I know this stuff is for hygiene, but I don't need that. So, but it's, but we went out on the porch for a little bit, and he started telling me all that. And I said, well, let's go back there. First he told me, he said, there's no place to plug up a charger on my side of the room. And I said, well, Randy, I said, all those rooms are the same. There's got to be one over there. No, not on my side. And I went over there, and right above his headboard, about this far, was a receptacle, just as, you know, it's almost eye level. And I said, well, Randy, right there. Well, I didn't say there wasn't a receptacle. I said I didn't have a cord. And I said, no, Randy, that ain't what you said at all. Yeah, it is. No, it ain't. Yeah, it is. And I said, okay, Randy, I give up. I quit. But, you know, I guess when you're in the same place all the time, I try to get him out on the front porch every chance I can, so he at least gets a little sunshine and fresh air. But, he called me up and left me a message one day. I thought he was just about to climb up on the roof and jump off. He said, you got to get me out of here, even if it's just for an hour or two. Just get me out of here. Go by and get a hamburger or something. He said, just come get me and get me out of here. He said, I'm going to go check and see if I can get a day pass. Next time I saw him, he didn't say nothing about it. But he likes the guys in the room with now, so that's a little better. Continue to keep him in prayer, and I know Barbara's brother's still there. And I've got a couple other people that I know that are over there, and it's I can't imagine what it would be like to feel like I was confined. He's not confined, you know. I started pushing him out the other day, and somebody said, where y'all going? And I said, we're going out on the porch. And he said, well, I thought you might be breaking him out of here. And I said, well, you can't never tell.
If they just changed their mindset, it'd be a lot better.
Yeah.
My brother, he's just...
You just have to decide, okay, this is it. What's the best I can do with it? But it's hard sometimes to do that, I guess. It's kind of like Liz was asking me the other day. We kept looking at that little fence between me and the neighbor is still in terrible shape. There's 2 good parts. The part that he did the day we first asked him about doing it, a couple of days later he got out there and he done about 16 feet of it. Then he quit, and then the world fell apart. His wife passed away, and all this other kind of stuff started happening, and then his health was gone down some. And then 2 sections of it blew down not long ago. So I went out there and put up new posts, new rails and everything. And he says he's got the pickets in his garage. And I saw the garage door open one day, and he's got all the stuff out there to finish it. But I said, if you put some of them pickets out, I'll cover it back up. And he just hadn't done it. So, and Liz says, I wonder why he don't do that. And I said, he just don't want to admit that he can't do it himself. And I said, I face that every week. just like with that little job you was talking about. Used to, that'd been something I'd have jumped on in a minute. But I said, no, I ain't gonna do that no more. But it's difficult to make those decisions, and so we have to try to put ourselves in their position. All right, we're in Judges. Scripture, most of the scripture that we're dealing with in the lesson actually is in the 7th chapter, but the context of the whole thing is 7th through 12th. We've talked a little bit about the Judges, and in the last lesson, God approached Gideon, and he told him, he said, you the one I want. And Gideon said, hey, wait a minute, I'm the youngest son of the smallest family of the smallest tribe. And he said, I have no ranking, I have no reason anybody would follow me or believe me or anything. He said, how in the world am I going to do it? And he said, because I'm telling you to. And so Gideon pursued that and tried to make some headway and tried to follow what God was telling him to do. And part of what he did is, God told him, he said, gather up some people. And so he started collecting up some troops. And then he had his troops together, and they went, and God said, kind of led him to make an offering. So he went to the town where he lived, and he tore down the altar to Bain, which was like the main thing in town probably. Right beside it was what they called an Asherah pole. Asherah was one of the female gods that was like a god of fertility. So there was usually Baal and Asherah was together. They put them together a lot, and so he tore down the altar of Baal and took rocks and built an altar to God, and then cut down the Asherah pole, which a lot of time was just a tree that had been carved or decorated or something, but it was used as a place of worship. So he cut down the Asherah pole and cut it up, made firewood, and offered an offering to God. God had told him to do this, and he said, okay, God, I'll do it, but I'm going to do it at night, just so maybe I don't get caught and killed. So the next morning the town gets up, and they find out the altar's tore down, the Asherah pole has been cut down and burned up, and there's an offering to God that's still simmering on the coals. And they figured out that it was Gideon that did it. They said, we're going to kill him, bring him out here, he's guilty of death. And his daddy, I don't know whether this was maybe still a little bit of faith in God in behind him, but he just told him, he said, hey, he said, if you're so upset because he did this to Baal, if Baal's such a great God, let him take care of it himself. So they said, okay, we're going to let Baal take care of it. And of course, Baal couldn't do nothing. Baal ain't even real. So, but his dad kind of averted that a little bit. But then God looked down and he said, Gideon, you got 32,000 men. We don't need 32,000 men. He said, we got to trim this army down a little bit so that when the war is won, y'all can't say, well, it's because we had so many good soldiers. So he said, go out there and talk to them, because, you're talking about a period of time they have been enslaved and controlled by another country. And they were not allowed to have weapons. Just like right now, just about every house around here, probably in Alabama, you can walk in and find at least a gun or two, and probably more than that. And some of them would probably scare you to death what you find in there. Most of them walk into my brother-in-law's house, you think, okay, this has got to be the militia. But they wouldn't allow them to have weapons. And they weren't trained soldiers. They weren't allowed to train soldiers. They were being controlled by that, you know, the people controlling them. They was doing their best to keep them weak. They was stealing all their food and destroying all their crops. That's why Gideon was threshing wheat in a wine vat down kind of below ground level so he could maybe get enough to eat the next day or two and without it being stolen. But he had 32,000 men that showed up and said, okay, we'll do what we can. We ain't got nothing but a rake and a hoe and a shovel here, but we'll do what we can. And God said, well, so that's too many. He said, go to them and tell them if they are afraid, if they're at least in any way afraid to continue this, just to go on back home. So Gideon goes to his army and he said, okay, if you're afraid to be here, or if you're scared for your life, God has said for you to just go on back home. 22,000 of them left, so 2/3 of his crowd just like that. So okay, that's what all I needed to hear. So they're gone. He's down to 10,000 men. He knew at 32,000 he was going to be outnumbered, and now he's down to 10,000. So he said, that's a small group. God said, well, Gideon, he said, you still got too many people. Still got too many people. I want it to be no doubt that it's God doing this and not you. And, you know, I'm sure they're thinking at this point, okay, 10,000 people against probably 120,000 people, and we don't have any weapons. It seems like that would be still pretty sure thing. God said, take them down to the water. He said, now I will pick out the ones I want. Well, when you just take a bunch of people down to the water, some people's going to kind of get down on their belly and just reach out there and put their lips to the water and drink. And then there are other people that's going to kind of kneel down and grab it in their hand and pull it up like this. That was the determining factor. The ones that did this, God said, we'll keep those. And the rest of them sent them on home. So 300 men did that. Then there's lots of different people that saying, well, the reason he said that is because those people were alert. They were holding their weapon in this hand, drinking water, and looking around the whole time, keeping an eye out. I don't think it really had anything to do with it. I think God didn't need them to be attentive. He had everything under control. He just needed to get the numbers down, and that's how it worked out. So here we got 300 people. So you're going against this group of people that later on in the scriptures it says they killed 120,000 people. So these 300 people are going up against an army that's 120,000 or more. And he said, okay, let's get our equipment together. We're going to go take this army. And they said, okay, where are the weapons? He said, okay, everybody gets a horn, which is they call it I can't sure something of it, but it was just a goat horn that they blow. You hear them, they go, all that. They're not a musical instrument. They're just a horn, kind of like the ones they used at Jericho when they marched around the city, and then they blew the horns, the ram's horn. So everybody got a ram's horn, and everybody got a torch, and everybody got a pot. And the thing was, you take the torch and stick it down into the pot because they was coming at night and they wanted to hide the torch until the last second. And they said, what about weapons? And they said, that's it. That's all you carry. So okay, there's 10,000 there's 300 of us. We're going against 120,000 people, and we got a torch and a ram's horn and a pot. So they all got up there and he divided them into 3 groups. And he put 100 here, 100 there, 100 over here. They're standing up on the hill above these people. But the night before all this happened, God said, well, if you're still a little bit scared, a little bit doubtful, he said, take your armor bearer and go over and do a little reconnaissance. So him, Gideon and his armor bearer, well, they sneak over there in the middle of the night, and they hear two of the guards, two of the sentrymen talking, and one of them's telling about a dream that he had. And it's a dream of a roll of a wheat roll or a barley roll or whatever, big one that rolls down the hill and hits the tent in the camp and just completely destroys it. Well, the other guy, you know, he just says, oh, well, that's plain as day. That means Gideon's coming with the army of the Lord and he's going to destroy us all. You think, okay. Where'd that come from? But, you know, God had given them not only the dream, but he had also given the other one the interpretation just exactly. So it had them all, they was all scared to death. He said, because they really put a lot of trust in dreams and dream interpretations. All through the Old Testament you see that. So they were already scared that Gideon was going to come with a big large army and going to kill them all. So right in the middle of the night when all of them's kind of resting, Gideon says, when you hear my horn sound yours and break your pot. So all at once, just like that, he sounds his horn, everybody breaks the pot, and all of a sudden there's 300 torches completely surrounding the camp, and everybody blowing horns, and they're asleep, so it's waking them up from a dead sleep with 300 of these loud horns. You know, you hear them, they're at the soccer matches, they used to have them, I forgot what they call them, big long horns they'd blow, and you could hear them for a long way. That's the kind of sound that you're talking about here. So these people, all these soldiers just woke up, and they was just completely, you know, they didn't know what was going on. They were confused, they were scared, they had heard all these rumors, and they were shouting and blowing the horns and hollering, the army of the Lord in Gideon has come. And so they turned around, and as it ended up, they ended up killing each other. And so the whole thing just kind of, God took care of the whole thing, and not a single soldier on Gideon's side had a weapon. So they won the battle, and some of them, I guess, slipped out and got away and was running, and they was chasing them. So at this point, then Gideon calls back in some of the other people, some of the other tribes, and says, okay, they're scattering everywhere, help us find them and all this. And so some of them, they came out and they helped, and Ephraim got mad because he hadn't called them in the first place, and he said, well, look here, you did more than we did. You caught the two kings, and those two kings, and took care of them. And they said, well, okay then. But they kept chasing them, and they went on, and finally they had called in the other tribes to come help them, and they were chasing some of the Midianites and some of the kings and all this, and then Gideon and his 300 men, they had been fighting and running and chasing, and was about wore out, and they was hungry, and they crossed the river after these two kings of Midian, and they came to Succoth. And they came to the king and they said, give us bread to eat because we're chasing the kings of Midian that have been just terrorizing all of us. We're chasing them and we're going to overtake them and kill them, but we're starving to death. Give us something to eat. And they said, well, no, you ain't got them yet, so we ain't going to choose sides. You just go on about your business. And he said, all right. He said, but when I come back after I've caught him, he said, you'll pay for that. So then he went on to the next little town, which was Peniel. Basically got the same story. They didn't want to help him either. They were afraid that if they backed him and then he lost, that they would be punished. So he said, he told them again, he said, when I come back, he said, I'll punish you for that. So his army went on and he caught these two kings and he brought them back, and he came back. And before he got to Succoth, he caught someone outside the city, and he told him, he said, I need you to give me a list of all of the rulers and the elders in town. And he gave him a list of 75 people. And he went in and he took those people and said, here are the two kings I told you I was going after, and you wouldn't even give me a loaf of bread to help my people and to help us accomplish it. He says, as a result, he said, I promised you I would whip you with briars. Can you imagine that? You know, taking the big old strings of briars. You know, a lot of times you go walk through the woods and them things grab you and it feels like somebody took a saw and run it down your leg. And he whipped them with briars. And then he went to the other town and he told them, he said, I told you I was going to punish you as well, and here they are. They had built a tower. You hear a lot of these little towns talk about a tower, and the tower served several purposes. In a lot of cases it was a place of worship. It was also a good place for a lookout to be up at the top so they could see the enemy coming from a long distance. It was like a designation. It was kind of like their pride and joy of the town. And it was also a place where when all else failed, everybody would run there and close it up, and it was kind of like a safe place. It was their tornado shelter or bomb shelter or whatever, you know. So Gideon went in there and he said, I told you that I was going to punish you. He said, I told you I was going to tear down the tower, and he tore down the tower, just completely destroyed it, which was a big loss to that town. Then he went on and he was talking to the two kings of Midian, and he said, the men that you killed back in Shechem, he said, what were they like? And they was kind of like you. He said, yeah. He said, that was my brothers. He said, if you hadn't killed them, I'd probably let you go now. But he said, ain't gonna happen. So he actually called on his young son. He said, kill him. And his young son said, I ain't never done that before. I don't think I want to do that. So Gideon killed him himself. And then the people said, Gideon, you have saved us from the Midianites. You have delivered us from the armies. God has shown that he has chosen you to lead us. We want you to be our king. And he said, I ain't going to be your king. Me or my sons or my grandsons, none of us are going to be your king. God is your king. And you think, well, man, that's good. He's really coming around on this thing. And then he says, but what I do want is, I want you to give me all the earrings of all the people that you, because you know back then the men and all wore gold earrings, and that was part of the bounty that you, when you would capture somebody, you'd take all the gold, and these people had this probably pots of gold earrings, and he said, I want all the gold earrings, and he took them and he made an ephod, which you hear about earlier back in Moses' days. And it was actually the high priest would wear this ephod as part of his priestly garments. And he made that, and he said, I put this up, you know, to remind us of God. Well, it turned into kind of a problem. People started paying too much attention to it and giving it too much, you know, human beings, seems like we would much rather worship something we can put our hands on than something that we can't. So they started worshiping that instead of God. They started giving it too much power and it kind of led them away. And Gideon started taking on extra wives and concubines. He had 70 sons. So he had a harem of women, and he was kind of taking advantage of the situation, even though he told them he didn't want to be their king. One of the last sons that he gave birth to, he named him Abimelech. And Abimelech means son of a king. So he told him he wouldn't be their king, but then he had a son, and he named him Son of a King. And he was taking valuables. And one of the commentaries I read kind of led back and said, you know, he asked for the earrings, the gold earrings to make this ephod. Well, when the children of Israel were out in the wilderness and Moses was up on the mountain getting the 10 Commandments, and they came to Aaron and they said, make us a god. He said, give me your earrings. So it kind of ties them together. Give me your earrings. And he made, and as Aaron said, he didn't make a god. He just threw the gold in the fire and a calf jumped out. You know, it wasn't me. I didn't do it. Just throw the gold in there and a calf jumped out. But it kind of ties to that and kind of makes you think back of that. Of taking the same thing, gold earrings, and making something that became a god or became an idol for these people to worship. But the people continued to serve the Lord mostly until Gideon died. And Gideon had 70 sons. But then he had Abimelech. Abimelech was born to him by one of his servants. And after Gideon died, Abimelech started saying, okay, this may be my chance. So he went to the people and he said, hey, would you rather have 70 sons of Gideon to serve, to be your king? Or would you rather have me? I'm your own flesh and blood. I'm some of your own family. And they said, well, we'd rather have you. And he said, okay. So he took a little offering from them. They gave him some money. And he went out and hired some thugs and built him up a little army. And he went and killed the 70 sons of Gideon. All of them except one. One son got away, Jephthah. The youngest son was able to get away and hide before they saw him. And so he was the only one left. But he killed all the rest of them because he didn't want none of them to lay claim to being king. Now, Abimelech probably was not king of any large area. It was probably just a local thing that he had kind of taken a little power by doing this. But Jephthah, once he had gotten safely away, he kind of hollered out to him from a hillside far enough away that he could get away before they could catch him. And he told him a little parable. And I'd heard this before in reading in the Bible, but it says all of the vegetation decided they needed a king, so they went to the olive tree and they said, be our king. And he said, well, I'm going to quit making olives and oil to anoint kings and to worship God with, to be your king? No, I ain't going to do that. And I said, okay. So they went next to the
Fig tree.
the what?
Fig tree.
Fig tree, yeah. The fig tree. And same thing. No, I ain't going to quit doing that. And then he went to the grapevine. No, I'm not going to quit making grapes. And finally he said, okay, they went to the bramble or the briars, the junk plants. And they said, okay, we'll be your king. And basically what they were saying is you had 70 good men. And they had told you they didn't want to be a king, that God would be your king. So you ended up choosing the worst possible choice. And said it would come back to haunt you. And Abimelech served for 3 years as king, and then it says God sent a spirit, a troubled spirit between him and the people. It seemed like they weren't getting what they thought they were out of him anymore. He wasn't turning out to be the king that they were looking for, that they wanted. And so they started to revolt against him. And he ended up, he built an army and he went out against his own people, actually, that had revolted against him. And he had destroyed them, and what was left of them had gone and assembled into a tower in their town. And he took an axe and went over and started cutting, and he got him a bundle of brush. And he told all of his men, he said, do the same thing, everybody get a bundle of brush. And they went to this tower, and they walked up and put the brush around the tower and set it afire and burned the tower and killed 1,000 people, men and women and children that were in that tower. And then they went to the next little town that was revolting against them, and they were going to do the same thing. And they started walking up there, and as he walked up to the tower to put down the brush, there was a woman up in the top, and she had an upper millstone. Now you've seen stories, a lot of them where a mule or an ox would pull a millstone. That's in a big mill. But a personal millstone at the house might, it might have been small. It was kind of a cupped out rock that sit down here. And then there was a cylindrical rock that they would take, and they would just do like this and grind up the wheat and make the flour. And she took the upper millstone and she just dropped it, hit him in the head and mortally wounded him. So he's laying there, he knows he's fixing to die, and he looks to his sword bearer and he said, take your sword and kill me. I don't want it to be said that a woman killed me. You think, well, here it is, thousands of years later. We're looking at, yeah, it's a woman killed him. So then he was gone, and they turned from God again. And then as you get on, that's kind of where our lesson today ended up. But as you follow on through it, then there were several other judges that came through. There was Tola, and there's like one verse on Tola, and he came and he served and he did this, and then J.R. And it was a short little thing about him too. He said, and the people in Gilead, there was the family that was the Gilead, Gilead I think is the name that they actually give. He had several sons, and then he also had a son by a servant girl. And his brothers said, we don't want him around here. He's not part of us. We're not dividing any of our inheritance with him. So they ran him off. His name was Jephthah. So he had to leave. He was driven away. And it's kind of like when David was driven out of town by Absalom. He ended up hanging out with a bunch of rough characters, a bunch of scoundrels. They were all like mercenary soldiers, and you think about, all these rough people that you see. But he built him up a pretty good little army, and he was he was making his living by catching people between cities and robbing them, and that's how they kind of got by. And all of a sudden, the people got to be under slavery again, and they cried out to God, and they said, help us, have mercy on us, we'll serve you. And God said, no. He said, we've done this before. Every time you come back and you say you're going to serve me, and then you turn your back on me again. He said, I ain't doing it. And they kept on, and finally he said okay, and he told them to call Jephthah. So here they come up to Jephthah. Now they've run him out of town, told him they didn't want him to be part of their family, didn't want to share in their inheritance with him, and they come to him and say, hey, little brother, good old boy, buddy pal, we need a little help. He said, let me get this right now. You didn't want me to live with you. You didn't want me in your town. You didn't want me to be part of your family. You didn't want me to take any of your inheritance. But now you need my help, and you come begging to me. And they said, yeah, pretty much. And he said, well, if I do come help you, he said, and I am able to deliver you from these people, He said, then I'm going to be the leader. I'm going to be your leader. I'm going to be your king. And they said, okay, whatever it takes. And so Jephthah came in, and he started battling, and he started winning, and he came down to the last major war, the one that was going to make the deciding factor. And instead of trusting the Lord to continue to help him, he started bargaining with God. When you find yourself bargaining with God, you've kind of gotten off track. You don't need to bargain with God. God's going to do what God's going to do. It ain't a, God, if you'll do this, I'll do that. God said, this is what I'm going to do whether you do that or not. And we just have to follow him. He doesn't bargain with us. He doesn't follow us. But Jephthah made a foolish bargain. He said, God, if you'll give me victory here, when I get back home, the first thing I see walk out of my house, I will offer to you as a sacrifice. So God gave him a victory, and he was going home, and he said, okay, finally, we're done with that. And he started coming up to his house, and his young daughter, his only child, young daughter, comes running out with tambourines and castanets and singing and dancing. And he just kind of falls down off his horse, and he said, oh no, what have I done? And he told her, he said, I've made a vow unto the Lord, and I can't go back on it. And he told her what it was. And it's one of the, it says that he would offer her as a burnt offering. So she said, well, you've told God that you would do it. And she said, you got to do it or we'll pay the price. She said, but give me 2 months. Let me go with my friends and mourn my virginity. She said, I'll never be married. I'll never have an opportunity. One of the commentaries that I was reading, it says something I have not heard before. It said he may not have actually had to offer her as a burnt sacrifice, but he may have given her as a servant to the priesthood. He may have said, okay, putting you in this, you're going to be a nun the rest of your life, basically. You won't be able to be out running around free. You won't never get married. You'll never do anything. You'll serve the Lord every day, all day long. And I guess that's a possibility, or it could be that he actually did. But you think that God would not require him to offer his child as a sacrifice, because that was so against anything God would have asked him to do. Even though God told Abraham to do that, he didn't really intend on him doing it and didn't let him do it. So Jephthah, he made a terrible mistake. He said that affected her. She never was to be married. She never would have children. So basically his family line, it was the only child he had. His family line would end because he would have no children. After Jephthah, there were 3 more judges: Abzan, Elon, and Abdon. That came along, that were also considered what they call minor judges. And then the next judge that comes along we'll read about will be Samson, which we're all more familiar with. I can remember every time I think about Samson, I think my grandmother, our family Bible had pictures about several stories, and Samson was one of them. And I always used to love to hear her tell me the story about Samson. Now the thing about these judges is they were just ordinary people, and they were not anything really special. It was just someone that God chose to use. And in a lot of cases, they were not really even good people. Even the ones we've discussed today, none of them really were good people. But God chose to use them. God can use anybody that will yield to him. Doesn't matter what you've done in your life or what might have happened or what you may have been guilty of at some point, or what might be detestable in your behavior. God can use us all, and we've all made mistakes and all continue to make mistakes. But we can be sure that God will continue to love us and continue to be there for us. And I'm doing a song today that it's kind of a new one that I've been working on. And it says, you know, he looks at his life and he thinks there's nothing really been special about me, nothing about me, but because of God, because of what he's done for me, I can be an example. I can be a testimony. And so we just need to do that. We just need to trust God to take us and use us. You know, they called Gideon. Gideon was not a warrior. Gideon didn't have any weapons. And he got a big old army together, and God said, we don't need a big old army. Finally got down to 300 men, and he said, okay, here's your weapons. A ram's horn and a torch. Now, go into battle. Sometimes it sounds that crazy to us when God tells us to do something. We say, well, God, ain't no way in the world I can do that. He said, you're right. You can't. But I can. And that's what we need. That's what he wants us to learn. You know, he could have let Gideon go with 32,000 men, and it would have still been a major victory. But it would have been very easy to say, well, you know, we were really good. We was able to whoop three times as many people, or 4 times as many people. God said, no, I don't even want it to be the least doubt that it's me. And there are times, and we've talked about it in here before, times, things that have happened in our life, where we look at it and say, well, that wasn't me, wasn't anything that I'd done, that was God. And it's God moving, God doing what he had promised to do. If we'll get out of his way, he'll do things in our life that will change the world. But we have to be willing to trust him. Father, we thank you today for this lesson, for this story of the judges, Lord, and how we can look at our own lives, Lord, and see how even though we're imperfect, even though we have problems, even though we fail you every day, God, you can use us. You're willing to use us. You're ready to use us. All we have to do is yield to you and allow you to use us. God, give us that faith. Help us to see, God, that if anything is good to come out of our life, Lord, it has to be from you. God, we need to trust you to do that. Continue with us, Lord, as we go into worship, that we might lift your name up, we may praise you and honor you in all that we say and do. It's in Christ's name. Amen.